Today we're going to explore the wonder and beauty of paradox. I've always loved paradox. I remember the first time I heard, and I didn't understand it at all, this was many, many years ago, Jesus said, unless you die to yourself, you won't find yourself. And I couldn't figure it out until I had my own clarity come on, and understand that. So now these are a few of the things that people have asked. If there is no ego, and there is a quote. It says, "There is no ego, and all you'll ever see is you." Don't try to figure it out with your mind, because this is what happens. But we're going to find a way in which all this is going to come together. Okay? How can reincarnation be a fact when there's only now? If everything is predetermined, now Ramana Maharshi said everything is predetermined. Albert Einstein, who was not only a scientist, but a great man, an enlightened being actually, he said predetermination is the life already lived. Course in Miracles says the script is already written. So that's quite something. Now, if that is the case, now where does the law of attraction come in? Where it says you can create your own reality and you can make of your life whatever you want, and it's been big business and it's all over, and many people have come up with it. So we're going to see how the paradox is so beautiful, because by seeing the paradoxes, everything will start to light up. And I hope that by this evening you'll have a light bulb up there. Switched on. How can evolution be reconciled when this very moment is perfection itself? Because that's what all spirituality says. We are perfect right now, right? Okay. And how can there be only one when there are billions of expressions? So, are we confused? A little bit? How it all makes sense? Okay. So, so the first thing we have to do in order to start understanding this more with your intuitive heart, and so the clearer you are as you listen, the clearer you feel in your heart, the more the two join together. There are two things we need to know. First is called the relative and the absolute. And number two, I won't tell you what it is. It is a word, and it's called a miracle word, and it will put everything together. But before we tackle that, let's talk about the first two principles. Okay? All of life is made up of relative and absolute. Now, when we talk about absolute, it means that it is timeless, it is beginningless and endless, it has no change, it just is. Nothing could create the absolute, because if whatever created the absolute, who created that before it, right? So it's beginningless and endless. That is called the absolute. The one thing about the absolute is that it is the source of everything that we experience. Everything came from this absolute. But it itself is just spirit. Okay? Now from that comes the relative. The relative is the world we experience every day. In fact, all we know initially is the relative. But the greatest mistake we do until we actually wake up is that we make the relative real. And we make it so real, we make the world so real, in fact, that we do not believe there could be other than, that could be something more. Or, It has to be real because, again, we see it, we experience it, we smell it, we touch it. Okay? But when we say relative and absolute, understand this is very important. The relative is only relative to the absolute. So the absolute is the whole source, but it's invisible, it is timeless. Now that which is relative to time, is relative to change, and it's relative to beginning, middle, and end, you see? And it has no lasting substance. So everything that we experience, that we can touch and see and feel, okay? In other words, everything that is called relative. This is very important to understand at this point. But again, I repeat, it is relative to the absolute. This is one thing that because we do not see it, we do not see the timeless. Okay, we do not see that which always is. So, if we were to take, there was a statement there, reincarnation, and I'll give you the first hint of how we can put it all together. If reincarnation is a fact, and it does happen, well, how come we say there is only now? Okay, now picture the following, okay, before you learn about the miracle word. That will all put it together. Okay. Let's assume that the moment I was born, somebody took a video of me as a baby, lying lying naked on the crib, whatever. Then every 7 years after that, they took a video of 1 minute. Every 7 years. So by the time I reached my age, and I had 1 whole hour of movie, and I'll watch this movie, I say, oh my God, look at how many bodies I had. I had a baby body, then I had a child's body, then I had a teenage body, then I had a young person's body, then a mature body, then an older body. So who was I, right? So now, stay. I hope that you're feeling this. So when we see this movie and you see all these different bodies, and you're watching them all now, one after the other, this is also symbolic of the relative world, because the relative world, even though it seems to be linear, seems to have a past and a future, it really doesn't. Everything is contained now. And this containment of now is called cellular memory. In fact, our body carries all the memories of all the experiences that we've had. Everything happens now. I've done hypnotherapy for 30 years, and I always did take the people back to their experience, and whatever they experienced 10, 20, 30 years ago, they experience it now. If it hasn't been resolved, because it is still in the cellular memory, you see? So the body is relative to all these experiences that we've had, but because we are not aware of these experiences moment to moment, in other words, we're not conscious of them, they are subconscious. And it is the subconscious that dictates our moment-to-moment life, or what is happening all the time. So all fears and guilt and shame and whatever is still there in the subconscious mind. Okay, so now you see the picture. Now you see, as you watch the video, you see all the bodies of Burt, one after the other. My goodness. When you look at it, because you never actually did before, and for that sense, just to see the changes happening one after the other, then you see, wow, so am I really the body then? Because it keeps changing all the time. But one thing that I've been in all these bodies is always I am. Was always, what I call myself. So, so therefore you begin to see something quite mind-boggling, is that now is absolute. Okay, whatever happened is relative. Are we beginning to understand now more and more how we put it together? Okay, that even though you might have had 1,000 births and deaths, you've had those experiences, yet you're always now. And in truth, because those experiences are relative, the truth is that you never had them, except as experiences that have already happened. They are history, they're finished. They are a memory. Because you see, that's what makes up the ego. All these experiences, all the fears and guilt and shame and all these things that we identified with. You see? So this is where we're going to see the miracle word. Do you know what the miracle word is? It's discussed in religions, it's discussed in psychology, but nobody really understands it.
Spirit.
Hmm?
Spirit.
It's forgiveness. Now, the moment you think of the word forgiveness, immediately you think of forgiving someone for what they did to you. That's the biggest mistake. And that's what religions usually teach you. Forgive your neighbor even if they persecute you. And then he says, yeah, I forgive you even though you persecute me. Well, the very fact that you think they persecuted you is not forgiveness at all. Because you still carry the stigma of having been persecuted. Got it? So, forgiveness is a paradox. Now listen very, very carefully, because if only this message would come through, it is worth it. And you cannot listen to it enough. Okay? Forgiveness is giving forgiveness. Giving. This means the paradox is that forgiveness is really knowing that there's nothing to forgive. Because whatever has been done to you is relative. Anything that is relative is subject to change. Anything that is subject to change, if you keep it in your mind and keep dwelling on it, it will control your whole life. And that's where the law of attraction comes in too. Because everybody is living the law of attraction, right? If they're miserable, that's what they attracted. You become what you focus on, right? But if you begin to realize that you are so incredible in this now moment, that you are the absolute itself, you start looking at all relative plane of living not as not real. Because I don't even like the word illusion. It's repeated too often, and then you begin to think, what do you mean illusion? I see it there, I touch it. How can it be an illusion? You see? So what we call relative, it relates to the absolute that makes it possible. Let me give you an example here, which I did the last satsang. You look at the sky, and the sun is bright and it's beautiful. The sky is clear. The sky is the absolute. The sky is always there because it's space. And then it forms clouds. Okay? The clouds form because of the absolute sky. But the clouds, being moisture, they begin to thicken and thicken and thicken, and before you know it, you say, oh my God, there's no sun. It's so dreary, it's so dark. And you really begin to believe that there's no sun. Maybe, because that's what it feels like. Okay? So now, the clouds come and go. That's relative. The sky doesn't come and go. The sky has nowhere to go, nowhere to be. It just is. So it is absolute. Okay? But the clouds are existing relative because of the absolute. Okay? Now when you put them both together, you begin to see that what we call the clouds, they come and go, they're always changing, and therefore the reality is very, what is the word? It's very flaky. Okay? It's relative. Okay. Another thing you can take into consideration here, the absolute and the relative. We are all awareness. Ramana Maharshi never called it awareness because his limited English, so he called it pure consciousness only. Okay, but it doesn't matter. So pure consciousness is absolute. I'm talking about pure consciousness now. Okay? Now, there is no scientist living, no one on this earth with enough intelligence who can say what consciousness is. Nobody knows. Einstein was one of the first, says, that nobody knows what consciousness is, but yet we know it exists because we are conscious beings. You see? So consciousness, pure consciousness, is absolute. Now what comes from pure consciousness? You are conscious of your consciousness. When you are conscious of consciousness, in this case we call it awareness of awareness, okay, we begin to wake up spiritually. But most of the time we're aware of something. So in this particular case, it's pure consciousness becomes aware of something. That something, what is it? What is the first thing we are aware of? We are conscious of? Thought. Okay, stay with me here. Okay, thought comes from pure consciousness, because consciousness can be conscious of itself. Okay, I can be conscious of the thought. I can be conscious of what is going on. You see, from that comes the impressions that make up our world, make up our mind. These impressions that we can call thought. Thought comes and goes. Consciousness, pure consciousness, is absolute. But it is through the absoluteness of pure consciousness that thought is possible. Now thought begins to take on a reality based on what you thought you experienced in the past. And so therefore every thought becomes a concept. Now here is the thing, you see, like if you begin to think at a thought is a thought. But you will find that all your suffering, all your emotional pain, everything you're going through, all the misery in the world, all the wars, everything comes from thought. What you made thought to be according to your conception of it, to what you think it is. So, so thought has become very real, and you no longer see it as a thought. Because the moment the thought is made real, now stay with me here, this is very, very important, okay? Are you listening? Okay, the moment you make a thought real, it becomes a belief. The subconscious is made up of beliefs. Belief means that which you think is real. So when you make something real, it owns you. Did you know that if you think the world is real, it owns you? You become afraid of it, you become afraid of the people, what's going to happen, war is going to come. The governments can make up their minds. In the United States, everything is going haywire. If you begin to think about this, you can go crazy. Okay, because you think it's real. But the moment you start forgiving, and we're going to go into that, you start forgiving the relative, that's called awakening, enlightenment. Okay? You know the wonderful thing about forgiving? And forgiveness is a paradox. Forgiveness means there's nothing to forgive. Okay? So why am I saying there's nothing to forgive? Because it's relative. The relative is here today and gone tomorrow. You know, like you buy some clothes, for example, fine, they can last you for a few years. But eventually they're going to go, you know, gone. And the same with every material thing. But the one thing that is never gone is pure consciousness. That is always. So when you begin to see that pure consciousness always is, and when I begin to feel pure consciousness, I am at peace. When I see pure consciousness, I am happy. When I'm in pure consciousness, I am in love. Because there's nothing that's outside of this pure consciousness. Because every living being, when I talk about pure consciousness, I'm not just talking about myself. I'm talking about you, all of you are all pure consciousness in your natural state. But you see, when I look at you, I don't see you as just a body, which is relative. I don't see you as just a personality, which is relative. I forgive it. And by forgiving it, I see you as spirit. And now I'm in love. You see? So that's what love really is when you are able to go beyond the relative into the absolute. But another thing that is important here is that you might say, well, Burt, you mean to tell me that the absolute and relative are separate? No. It's all one. It's all one. But the relative is a representation of the absolute. The absolute is that which you cannot see. It's invisible. Okay? It is spirit. Relative is that which appears very, very real. You have made real. When you begin to understand, and they're both opposites, but they complement each other. They're opposites, and that's how the old paradox comes into being. When, when you begin to forgive the relative, everything that is relative, you forgive it. My God, can you think of anything more joyful than that? Because then you enjoy everything. You don't take anything seriously anymore. Did you know that why people get sick and they get heart attacks and they suffer so much emotional pain? Because they are serious people. The Course in Miracles says they forgot to laugh. You see? And it's so true. It's so true, because the moment you start taking things seriously and you make them very real, they own you. A person could be a billionaire. And you think, oh my God, they've got so much money. Oh, they can do anything they want. Are they happy? Chances are they're not, because to them, those $1 billion are real. And anything that you make real owns you. You see? In the same way, when you begin to realize that your body is changing all the time, and that doesn't mean that it's not, it's made up of trillions and trillions of cells, and all you know right now is this. But at the same time, you overcome your fear of death the moment you realize that the body is relative. Relative to what? To who I am. If you see a human being and they drop dead in front of you, the moment they hit the ground dead, you know what you say? Oh, let's do something with that body, let's bury it. You don't see it as a human being anymore. You don't see it as anything. You call it a body, a corpse. Why? Because the energy, the life that made it look real is now invisible to the naked eye. You see? Okay, so when we talk about forgiveness, we cannot really stop talking about it when you begin to understand it. The thing I respect and love about the Course in Miracles is that all it talks about, there's 1,000 pages, and people think because it's written like a Shakespearean type of rhythm, so it's very hard to understand. But you know what it's all about? Love and forgiveness. That's the whole course. That's it, right there. And it's all about forgiveness. Now, if you start to forgive, miracles start to happen in your life. I was just talking to Boris and Ben when they came in, and I mentioned how one day I was getting too many emails, and I didn't know, I says, oh my goodness, I'm spending all day, 100 emails a day from all over the world, answering each one, and I says, and they're all asking the same thing. Why don't I write a booklet about it? So I wrote a booklet. But as I wrote a booklet about it, I was inspired to do so. And I called it Hiding in Plain Sight. And hiding in plain sight because it's, here you are, it's so simple, you are, And anyway, what I'm trying to say is that at this particular point, I've learned how to forgive. Many things have happened in my life which I don't want to go into, but I've learned to forgive. And every time I forgave, something wonderful happened. And what happened through this forgiveness that I was doing all the time is that my book, which was a PDF, and I was sending it to everybody, and it was only about 100 pages, not even that much. A publisher saw it and she loved it, and she said, oh, this is going to change consciousness in the world. And she really loved it anyway. And then a Russian man, a businessman, he saw the book and he said it really changed his life. And he said he wants to bring this to the people, to the Russian people, because Russian people don't have this kind of knowledge that he was watching on the internet. Now, what am I saying here? Did I do anything about this? No, it just happened. So what I'm saying is that when you start to forgive, wonderful things start to happen. Wonderful. You know, I've had people write me and they say, oh my goodness, I'm afraid, you know, I'm 25, 26 years old and I'm losing all my friends because nobody talks my language and I'm feeling alone most of the time. What can I do, Burt? You know, so I mentioned forgiveness, but nobody listens, you know, nobody listens. And they said, well, there's nothing to forgive about anything. Nobody has done anything to me. I said, no, forgive yourself. Forgiveness means that whatever you're experiencing is what you're telling yourself. Forgive yourself. Give yourself that space. Enter it. You see what I mean? And by giving yourself that space, you enter a different dimension, a different way of looking. But some have done so. And then they tell me how their life has changed just through forgiveness alone. So if I were to say, what transforms you? It is the miracle of forgiveness. But please understand, forgiveness is not when someone has done some harm to you. It is when you see that what is controlling you is something relative. Are you with me so far? Mm-hmm. This is very important. So you might say, so I'm going to keep on, you know, I'm going to start forgiving this apartment, I'm start forgiving that camera, I'm start forgiving my clothes. Yeah, why not? But forgiving does not mean that they've done something bad to you. Forgiving the fact that you are attached to them. You see? And the moment you forgive, now remember, forgive, you give forth. In other words, when you look at the clouds, and you say, oh, wow, it's so dark. You forgive yourself for thinking it's dark because it's all in your mind. It's only clouds covering up the sun. You see? So you forgive the clouds, but doesn't mean it's going to change the clouds at that moment. Okay? But by forgiving the clouds, all of a sudden you have lifted from the misery of feeling, oh, it's so dark, oh, it's raining now, oh, this is happening. See what I mean? Now, are there any questions at all at this point?
Burt, you're saying about forgiving the clouds, but is it not yourself
always
forgiving what you're seeing in the clouds?
Very good. That's beautiful. That's exactly what is happening all the time. It's always self-forgiveness. Always.
But it's also too your, I mean, just in that example, it's your belief about what a cloud is.
That's right. It's you're forgiving that belief. Mm-hmm. You see? And that brings gratitude, and that brings you also love and respect for yourself. Because you're not trying to change anything, you're just trying to see something as it actually is. If you have thoughts in your mind all day long, coming and going, I get so many emails all the time, how do I overcome these thoughts? I said, don't try to overcome those thoughts. Because that in itself brings another, more thoughts. That's what guilt is built from. Do you know that one of the strongest thing in us that kills the spirit is feeling of guilt? The feeling as if you've done something wrong, but you don't even know what it is. You see? And you know how to forgive yourself? Can I hear some feedback here? How do you forgive yourself? Now I'm talking about the real forgiveness here, okay? Forgive something. You're not seeing it as wrong, you're not seeing it as right, you're not seeing anything, just forgive it. You give it a space to be what it is, a relative object subject. So how do you forgive yourself?
Well, it's just like you said, to give it space, to see that it is.
So when you give yourself, that's beautiful. Okay, so when you see yourself as the space that you really are, how do you see yourself?
Well, you see, you are able to see your judgments. So you step aside from what you're seeing.
Okay. More importantly is that you see yourself as innocent. You see, that no matter how you saw yourself, instead of saying, I made a mistake of seeing it as real, or something like this, which is okay at this point, It might still work, but to go even deeper. Okay, that I am innocent. And the moment you see yourself as innocent, because you are, in truth you are. You know what we mean by innocent? It means you are absolute being. You see? You're absolute being. You know, one of the most baffling things, one of the most difficult to understand is that 1,000 people would look at the world and each one would see a different world according to what they see. We all have that viewpoint. But then you go back into the very nature of what created that viewpoint. That viewpoint was a thought, a belief, an experience that you've had. Go deeper still, what made it possible for you to even think? Awareness itself, pure consciousness itself. And what is pure consciousness? Innocence, pure spirit, pure being. You see? So when you take yourself beyond the relative into that which is, and you see yourself as you actually are, you can feel changes happening in your life. You might get up in the morning, all of a sudden you didn't have enough money, all of a sudden somebody sends you a donation or somebody does something, things begin to break in ways you never expected because you were able to forgive. You see? Now, when I talk like this, it sounds like a fairy tale. But I'm talking from experience. And also I've done a lot of research, and also people who have been writing me, and they said, you know, I started forgiving. Wow, things change. You know, like I've always been criticizing my husband, I'm always fighting, I'm always finding things wrong with him and he with me. And all of a sudden I began to see, no, but beyond all these differences, he is just like I am. And so I forgive myself for having done this, and and all of a sudden something new starts to happen even within the relationship. Because you brought something so ephemeral, something so subtle, the absoluteness of something beyond the relative. Now again I repeat, the absolute and relative, although they are opposites, they function totally different. You are a human being. I explained it in my first book, you know, hiding in plain sight. You see? And you are a human being. The human is always wanting, needing, craving, desiring, and is never satisfied, is never happy, always wants something, always looking for pleasure and wanting to get rid of pain. The being is being. Not being this or being that, just being, which is forgiveness itself. Are you seeing the dynamic here? So the moment you begin to see the being as being and everything is okay, whatever is happening, you have forgiven all that stuff that was driving you nuts. You see? So by doing that, all of a sudden a whole new consciousness